I didn't have any writing experience or production experience. I just kept calling them and saying, can I work here? And they kept saying no. So I kept calling. For me, it was just getting in the rooms with the people that I wanted to learn from the most. And I did that by saying, how can I help you? Not, do you have 5 minutes to listen to my pitch?
Right.
It's always like, you know, can I go pick up your lunch? Can I get your laundry? Can I read that script for you? Can I do coverage? Anything they need you to do. And the better you do with that, like a lot of people are like, I don't want to be a good assistant because then they're not going to want to promote me. Like that's very far from the truth. And by and large, there are really good people around who want to have you invest in the material. There are good things about working alone, but overall, I hadn't had any TV experience before I moved to LA, and I found that I really love the collaboration, and it's really great to be in a room with people and you know, pitch an idea and be wrong. I never thought it would be so fun to be wrong, but it really is because you end up finding the best idea and moving forward that way. And at the end of the day, you're like, none of us could have individually come up with any of these ideas. Like some of the stuff that happens on our shows. So I never would have come up with a guy being allergic to electricity and like being taken seriously as an attorney and, you know, 6 people sitting around the room from their different experiences in different places in life were able to bring their strengths to the table. It was really cool. So I was an assistant for almost 10 years before I started getting paid for my writing. And there were plenty of times where I thought, like, I honestly need like a 4th grade education to do the jobs that I'm doing right now. Like, I can pick up laundry. It's good for me. For having all this, you know, student loan. But the relationships that I made ended up being the ones that are keeping me working now. The people that I was working around and the people that I was working for, and just always saying yes to everything, asking the people around you how you can help them, showing up on time, showing up when you say you're going to. Try not to ask your boss to do too many things for you until you really have earned it. And I found that it's a lot better to wait until your boss comes and says, can I read something? I'd love to read something written. Then they're in a position where you're doing them a favor by giving them your script to read. And it's a lot harder when you're going to your boss and you're saying, could you pretty please do me a huge favor and read this thing for me and give me your notes? And yeah, it took me a while. It took like 3.5 years before Jeff offered to read something of mine. But then when he did, after he did, he wrote a recommendation to Sundance on my behalf. So I guess earning the favors that you ask is important, and hanging there. So I wrote the first draft of this pilot called Bury Me. It's a funeral comedy based on my childhood. And I wrote it the first draft at UCLA in my master's program. And then years later when I was working on Better Call Saul Season 1, I heard that Sundance was doing their very first episodic TV Writers Lab. They've done the Feature Writers Lab for years. And so I wrote a treatment, I already had the script and the second episode written at UCLA, but I went back and I made it a lot less broad. I kind of reworked the tone of it, so it was my own. And I just submitted like you normally would for the feature writers program. And I had an interview and then ended up going to Utah for 6 days. In the first 4 or 5 days, I worked with writing advisors on the pilot. So I worked with Greg Daniels, Michelle Ashford, Carrie Aaron, Noah Hawley, who's doing Fargo now, and got notes from all of them. And then the 4th and 5th day, we had industry advisors come out. I was paired with Mark Johnson, who's working on the Alexander Payne movie now. And we learned how to pitch our projects and how to appeal to the more industry side of things. And then since we got back, we've been in development. I had some great writers in my lab. Barry Jenkins was one of my fellow writers who won an Oscar for Moonlight. Lisa Crone, who wrote the Broadway production of Fun Home, the adaptation of the graphic novel Fun Home. So they're all in development for their projects, and I've actually talked to Stacey Heatherly at the Film Commission in Nebraska, and working with and Aaron.
Fremont.
Oh yeah, Fremont. I've been back to Fremont several times because show does take place in Nebraska, so I've been looking at options for filming in Nebraska. So we're working on season 4. Today we were talking about Nebraska in the room. I don't know if y'all are watching the show, but there is a storyline where perhaps Jimmy, who is Gene in Cinnabon, you see at the end of Breaking Bad, Saul is told in the basement by the disappearer Robert Forrester, he's told, you're going to end up in Omaha, Nebraska. Best case, you'll be managing Cinnabon. And he actually is in our show managing Cinnabon. And we've got one of our characters, Kim Wexler, who has said she's from a small town on the Nebraska-Kansas border. And that like Superior. It's probably modeled after Superior. So we do have some Midwest storyline in our features. It's kind of hard at the end of the day to say whose idea is whose, because we do, there are 8 of us in the writer's room, including the writer's assistant, so 7 writers and our writer's assistant, Ariel. And we kind of we beat through the story together, and we do get all the beats pretty solid, which is different on every show. There are some shows where the writer pitches the whole entire thing. We break all 10. And then the writer goes off, I go off for 2 weeks and I take the note cards from our board and I go make an outline and come back and present it to Sony and AMC. I went from focusing on the story beats to more focusing on the character motivations. And it's much easier to figure out the scene when you go into it saying, what is the character thinking? From every angle. Not like, so we're asking, what's Mike thinking from Mike's point of view, not what is Mike thinking through Jimmy. Do you know what I mean? So if you take each character individually and ask what their motivations are and what they're doing in each scene, what they're trying to get and who's opposing them, then it's a lot better than saying, this is what we want to happen in this scene and here's why. We don't go in and say, we want a pair of red shoes. Let's have Gus figure it out. It's not like that. It's like, what does Gus want? What are his concerns right now? Who's he mad at? And what of that do we need to actually see that will progress the story? I think my comedy training helped a lot in the room that way. Like yes-anding, you don't cut down someone's idea unless you have a solution already. So, and then when somebody's pitching something, your first thing should be, no, here's why that will work. It's like, what if we bend these rules over here to try to make that work? What does it look like? So everybody just try to make this work. When everyone's trying to make everyone else's ideas work, it ends up being pretty magical. And for the actors in here, which I applaud you for doing, we watch producer selects in our room, so we're not in the room when people audition. We see the tapes at the end of the day that the casting directors are saying these are the people that we want to put forward. And often when we're casting an actor, or an actress, it's not necessarily the best performance that gets the role. It can be like sometimes we won't cast somebody because they're blonde and they're playing opposite our blonde lead lady. And so it's like, it can be things like their height, or this guy has an awesome beard, so we're going to cast him for this thing. So a lot of our decisions are not necessarily performance-based. A lot of times they are, but if you don't get a role, I hope that your first thought is not, I didn't do well, because you could have killed the audition and just not looked right for the scene, to be honest. But we have had things where we have to keep in mind, like, how many days are we using this actor, because after a certain point, we have to lock them off for another episode. And those are things that probably a producer should keep in mind as they're writing it. If you're writing your original idea as a writing sample, it's not as important, because you're probably not going to go into a meeting with the showrunner and they're like, forget my idea, I want to make yours. They're saying, I want to know how you're writing and I want to make sure that you can write the tone of the show. So it doesn't matter so much. But when you are running your show, you have to keep those things in mind, because you've got to actually produce it. And we have 8 days to make each episode, so we can't shoot on them, it's too far away. The thing you have to keep reminding yourself is it doesn't matter how many rejections you get or how many, you mess up, you have all these irons in the fire and you can't focus on the one thing. And I think it's important to do that, to keep doing things that fulfill your own creating urge, whether it's like performing or taking a stand-up class or writing your own script or producing a short. Like the more projects you can get going, the less like one hiccup bothers you. And it's just as important to work for an actor if you want to be a writer, or work for a producer, or work in post, work in editing, or work in the art department, like whatever you want to do. As long as you're on set and being around people who are creating, you're going to get where you want to go. Reminder that I tell myself, like, okay, I know what I'm doing here. I really love doing this. It's why I came here. Remember to eat a sandwich. Remember to go on a walk. Remember to like call my mom. You know, take care of yourself and remember what you're doing here.